Gittin, Daf Yomi Bez, and Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. Tone of voice, tzarich lemimrinu benichuta. The words we use are very powerful and they can affect change in people, they can move people, they can form and create events. But what really makes the difference in our words is the energy that we project through the words that we use. When we're talking, we're projecting our energy. And it's the energy that makes the difference. It's the energy that moves people, and it's the energy that shapes events. And the energy of our speech is composed not only from what we say, but also from how we say it, and particularly from our tone of voice, because our tone of voice really gives away the inner energy from which it's coming. And that's important to know, not only when we're speaking, but also when we're listening to people, to listen not only to the words that they're saying, but to the tone of voice with which they're saying it. Our piece of Gemara, our sugya, revolves around a piece of Tanakh, which was one of the black marks in Jewish history. A terrible period of time at the end of Sefer Shoftim. 3 prakim at the end of Sefer Shoftim describe the case of Pilegesh Begivah, the concubine. A concubine is the halachic equivalent of a common law wife, the concubine of Givah. And the 3 chapters starts with the statement, Vayhi ba'yamim hahemu melech ein b'Yisrael. At that time there was no king. This is after Yeshua's died, before the time of Shmuel and Shaul and King David afterwards. It's that period of the Shoftim, which is the time where melech ein b'Yisrael. And it's sandwiched between those statements, because the very last sentence in Sefer Shoftim at the end of the story of Pilegesh Begivah is again, Bayamim ahen ein melech b'Yisrael, ish hayashar be'enav yaseh. This was a period of time where there was no king in Israel. Each person was doing exactly as they wanted. And sandwiched between those 2 phrases is the story of Pilegesh Begivah, where a man living in the southern part of Ephraim, a little bit south of Beit El, and he took a concubine, a Pilegesh, from Beit Lechem in Yehudah. They're living together in Ephraim, and their relationship goes sour. We'll see what exactly happens. And she leaves him and goes home to her father's house in Beit Lechem. He afterwards, when he calms down, is upset with what's happened, and he goes to Beit Lechem, Yehudah, to try and find her. He goes there, the father receives him very well, and there's a very entertaining few psukim in the paragraph where it describes that they really had a good time together, the father-in-law and the son-in-law. And they eat and they drink, and he persuades him to stay a little longer. They're really getting on well. Everything's going fine. And then eventually the time comes, he's got to leave. The father-in-law again tries to persuade him to stay. Eventually he has to leave and go back on the road back to his place in Ephraim. The father-in-law says, it's already afternoon. You won't make it in one day. You're going to have to sleep over. Rather sleep over here and go in the morning. And the son-in-law says, it's time, I've got to get going, we'll sleep on the way. They pass Yerushalayim, the young man who's with him, who's accompanying, says, let's go into Yerushalayim. At that time, Yerushalayim was Yevus. It was occupied by non-Jewish tribes, and he said, I'm not staying the night there, let's go and stay a little further. And they come to a place called Givah, which is exactly halfway between Beit Lechem and Beit El. We don't know exactly where it is today, but we know roughly where it is. It's north of Jerusalem, 6-10 kilometers north of Yerushalayim. There's a place called Givah, it's a Jewish town. He says, let's go into the Jewish town and find somewhere to stay. Eventually a man meets them, takes them into his house, and they spend the night there. Similar to the story of Lot and Sodom, the people of Givah gather around the house. They want the man for homosexual purposes. The host refuses, and eventually they get hold of the concubine. And they gang rape the concubine, and she dies from the experience. He takes her body back to Beit Lechem, Yehudah, and he is so furious. The man now whose concubine has been murdered and gang raped, he chops her body up into 12 pieces and sends a piece to each tribe. They didn't have social media at those times, otherwise he would have put it on Facebook. He wanted to make a point. The tribes of Israel were so furious that such a thing could have happened, so that they declare civil war on the tribe of Binyamin. They believe the whole of Binyamin is implicated in this, and they declare war on the tribe of Binyamin. They lose a lot of people, but eventually they virtually exterminate the tribe of Binyamin. They go to great lengths, very interesting halachic issues as to how they repopulate Binyamin with Benjaminites, because they were nearly wiped out completely. That's how serious this event was. And then just after that, the Maharal points out the very next posuk is the first posuk of Shmuel. Vayehi ish echad min haramatayim tzofim mehar Ephraim. There was a man called Elkanah, who was to be the father of Shmuel, from Har Ephraim, from that same region. Out of the chaos of Pilegesh Begivah comes the birth of the period of the Shoftim and of the Melachim, of the kings of Israel. What's all this got to do with Gittin and with our sugya? So you'll see the just stream of consciousness that the Gemara works with. It's actually a good example of how the Gemara goes from subject to subject, from topic to topic. It seems almost random, and yet there's a theme in it as well. It starts with Rabbi Eviatar sending. Rabbi Eviatar was an Amoira in Eretz Yisrael. He sends a psak to Rav Chisda in Bavel. And he says the Gittin that come from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, the Shaliach does not have to say it was signed and written in front of me, because we trust that you guys know what you're doing and that this would have been written properly. Says Rav Yosef, who's Rav Eviatar? So since when do we have to listen to Rav Eviatar? Since when is he a big expert on Gittin? In fact, I'll tell you something, that when he sent a letter once, says Rav Yosef, to Rav Yehuda, and quoted a posuk in the letter, he didn't make a line like we do in the Sefer Torah and Mezuzahs. We make a line and we quote a posuk. He didn't know the din of Rav Yitzchak, that if you quote more than 3 words from the Torah, you have to do siyutut, you have to make a line. And he wrote it without a line. So you see, Rav Eviatar is not such a halachic expert. Says Abaya, a very important comment, Atu kol de lo yada had Rabbi Yitzchak lav gavra rabbahu. So somebody didn't know Rabbi Yitzchak's law. Is that a flaw in his character? Does that mean that he's not a great human being? This is important for our times. The Gemara is saying, what Abaya is saying is, lack of information is not an impediment to human greatness. You don't know something, you don't know, nobody can know everything, so there's something you didn't know. So what? And certainly today you can look it up on Google. There's no greatness in knowing, and there's no smallness in not knowing. He says, Bishlam amilta detalia bisvara. If you want to say he couldn't work something out, lachaya, that would be a problem. Somebody doesn't have the lomdas to reach a conclusion from the Gemara and to come to a psak halacha based on the Gemara, to interpret a chazal, to understand the meimra properly of Gemara properly and to extrapolate it correctly. That I understand is not an Adam Gadol, he's an Amaretz. I get it. But he doesn't know something, there's a piece of information he's lacking, that's not terribly important. And furthermore, says Abaya, Rav Eviatar had a conversation with Eliyahu HaNovi, and the Ribbono Shel Olam is learning Rabbi Eviatar's Torah. Don't dismiss Rabbi Eviatar because he didn't know Rabbi Yitzchak's halacha. It seems the Ribbono Shel Olam wasn't very worried that Rabbi Eviatar didn't know one particular halacha of Rabbi Yitzchak, and tells the story where there are 2 views as to what this Pilegish Begiva did to damage the relationship. What exactly happened there? And what happened there was a very small thing. There was a fly in the soup, or some people say there was a machlokes, Rabbi Eviatar and Rabbi Yonason, whether there was a fly in the soup or there was a hair in the soup. And he got angry. What's he angry with? That she's not careful enough, that she doesn't care enough about what she's doing for him. She's cooking for him in the kitchen. That should be her focus, and she allows a fly in. So the one says, even the fly, although the fly she couldn't really control that. Rabbi Yonason says, no, the fly he wouldn't have got all excited about. What he got excited about was a hair. That she should have prevented. Like you're in a restaurant and you find a hair in the food, you're not very happy. And he wasn't very happy. Rav Eviatar meets Eliyahu and says, what was the Ribbono Shel Olam doing? And he says, the Ribbono Shel Olam was learning this parsha, Pilegish Begiva. And he says, and what did Hashem say? Was it a fly or was it a hair? It would be quite interesting. If Hashem was learning, we'll have a chance to find out. So he says, Hashem was learning, and he says, Rabbi Eviatar says this, and Rabbi Yonason says this. There are 2 views. Says Rabbi Eviatar, that's absurd. 2 views on a metzius. We're not arguing about a halachic thing. We're arguing about what happened. So did Hashem not know what happened? Was it a fly or was it a hair? Surely he knows. So the Gemara answers, Eliyahu answers, says, no, they're both true. There was a fly and there was a hair. He didn't get angry about the fly, but he did get angry about the hair. That's what the Ribbono Shel Olam was doing at that time. And as a result of that, the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda lo'olam al yatil adam eima yetera betoch beito. Always be careful not to cause fear in your home. And that's a principle that applies not only in a home, it applies in all situations of leadership. If you're leading a team of people or you're in a business, be careful that you don't disrupt emotional safety. Because if people don't feel emotional safety, all sorts of things happen. You don't get the truth, you don't get honesty, people withdraw, people disengage. There are all sorts of negative things happen when people don't feel enough emotional safety to be able to confront you with something that might be uncomfortable and something you don't want to hear. Because track the origin of Pilegish Begiva, this terrible story. It's worth reading these 3 chapters at the end of Shoftim to understand fully how terrible the story was. And track what triggered it. Go right to the trigger of the trigger of the trigger. It wasn't just that she allowed a hair into the soup or she allowed a fly into the soup. He lost his temper. He got angry. She left the house because she couldn't take the anger. The anger is what caused it all, and therefore always be careful. If you want to say something to your wife because you think she's not careful enough with the kashrus or with the health or whatever, so then you say it, but in a nice, calm way. In fact, 3 consequences happen if there's fear in a home. There can be gilui arayot, there can be impropriety, because a woman maybe has a situation where she's supposed to go to the mikveh and it's freezing cold and she can't get to the mikveh and she's afraid to tell her husband that she didn't go to the mikveh. So that's what happens when there's not emotional safety, there's fear. So she doesn't tell him and they have relations and she hasn't been to the mikveh, terrible thing. Ushvichus domim, v'chilul Shabbos, all these things can happen. Omar Rabba Bachana, Ado Omar Rabbanon, Shloisha Dvorim tzarich adam lomar b'toch beito erev Shabbos im chashecha. This that we say in Bamei Madlikin, that you're supposed to say 3 things before Shabbos. Isartim, if you've taken Meiser. Eiravtim, if you made the Eruvim. Now hadliku et hanei, now light the candles. Tzarich lemeimru b'nichuto. Don't say them in anger, say them calmly. Ki hechi delekablu minei, so that they will be accepted. Omer Ravashi says, and this links back to the beginning of the sugya. Ana lo shmiya le'dad Rabba Bar Chana. I've never heard this before from Rabba Bar Chana. But that doesn't mean I didn't do it. I figured it out myself. So again, we've got this idea, there are certain things you don't have to quote from the Mishnah Berurah, from the Shulchan Aruch, certain things you can work out yourself. And you need to keep those things that you can work out yourself, and he worked it out himself. And Tosfos goes into how we know that what she did wrong was not znut, although the Posuk in Shoftim says she was mezana, which means she was unfaithful. And Tosfos explains how we know it wasn't that she was actually unfaithful, it was just this argument over the soup, of the fly in the soup or the hair in the soup. That's what caused the whole issue. There's a beautiful Maharal, which we won't have a chance to go into, where the Maharal talks about the fact that Hashem created the world with Seder, with system and with rules and laws. They're physical laws. There's laws of physics, laws of nature, laws of psychology, laws of sociology, laws of politics and governance. He built the world with rules and laws. And that's part of the divine aspect of the world, are the rules by which the world functions. And when we move out of those rules and we function outside of those rules, we get chaos. And that's why the Maharal says, this is when there was no king, there was no government, and things became chaotic. And the Rebbeinu Shem was learning Parashas Pilegesh Begiva to re-establish a system of rule in society. And we see it in our times as well in many different ways. People need structure. Open offices, which was such an interesting experiment and has many advantages, but people are finding they need a place. They like to come to work and know that they've got a place. They want to come to work and have to look around for a place to sit, and every day it's a different place. They like structure. And the question of working from home or coming to the office and having managers and we can redesign the business environment, but people do need a structure because the Rebbeinu Shem created the world with a structure. And when one gets angry, one does things outside of the structure. And that's why one usually regrets what one did or said in anger. Because you do things that are undisciplined. You do things that you would never do if you were in a disciplined frame of mind. And you've removed yourself from the system of order that Hashem imposes on you and on the world. In the moments of anger, there's no order. You do things that are chaotic, and people respond chaotically. She runs off and goes back to Beit Lechem. Everybody responds when you trigger chaos. You trigger chaos with anger. And anger is a tone of voice. So if in the tone of your voice there's anger, you trigger chaos in yourself and chaos in everybody around you, and that's going out of the Seder HaOlam, of the way of the world. And so it's really important to be meticulous, not only about what we say, but about the inner place. What are we feeling when we're saying it? Because people will pick up what you're feeling. You can't hide that. If you're feeling anger, people will pick up the anger. If you're feeling calm, people will pick up the calm. And the idea of Seder, of having an order and a system and a discipline and a routine in one's life, is to enable, we spoke a week or two ago about equanimity, to be able to enable balance and a sense of evenness, which when one is angry, in a moment of anger, one removes oneself from that sense of equanimity, and one removes oneself from the divine intent by which the world was created.